Today we're going to talk about how to build primary chord number 1, 4, and 5, 7. Let's talk about chord number 1 first in C major scale. So let's write down the notes of C major scale. So starts with C and then ends with C. So these are the notes that you play for C major scale, and then we're going to number each note based on the order. Right, so C is first note, and that's called the scale degree number 1, and scale degree number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So these are the numbers that we're going to use to build a chord number 1, which is in root position. And the most common way to play chord number 4 is second inversion. And the most common way to play 5-7 chord is the first inversion. And the most common way to play chord number 1 is the root position. The reason that we're playing second inversion of chord number 4 and first inversion of chord number 5-7 is that it's easy to play from chord number 1 and from one chord to another. So instead of jumping up to play F chord and G chord in the root position, you can just simply stay in the position, alright? And then just alter the notes, okay? Right? You don't have to move, jump up and down. So it's more convenient to play the inversions than the root position. Except chord 1, most of the time you play chord number 1 in root position. But usually the 4 chord 5-7, you usually play the inversions because it's easier and more convenient to play from chord number 1. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about how to build up chord number 1 in root position. All right. All right. So we call C major is chord number 1 in C major because we're gonna build up 3 notes chord on step number 1, C, okay? So C and the rest of the notes built in skips the third only. So that's how we build up C chord number 1, C, E, G. And that's called chord number 1 in C major because the step number of the bass note, the root, the lowest note is step number 1. So when you build up 3 notes chord on scale degree number 1, it's called chord number 1. So you understand how this number works in chord, right? And so in that case, D chord becomes chord number 2. E chord becomes chord number 3 in C major. All right. How about chord number 4? So chord number 4 is basically F major, right? Because the F is step number 4 in C major. Right? So that's how you play chord number 4, right? So basically it's F major chord. But think about this, if you have to play chord number 1 to 4 root position, you have to jump up or down if you choose to play the lower F major chord. So you don't want to do that. You just need to stay there and play second inversion. So let's talk about how to turn root position into inversions. So basically this F major chord is a root position. And the root position, as you can visualize the shape of chord, and then the interval between the notes are third only. Alright? So the interval between F to A, the interval between the middle note to the top is a third. Right? So when you see the notes all built in the third only, you assume this is root position, and that's how you ensure that is the root position of the chord. All right. Now let's turn it into a first inversion. So that was the root, and then now we're gonna turn it into a first inversion. All you need to do is to move the bass note only octave higher, and the rest of 2 notes stay the same. So A and C will stay there. And just move the bass on F octave higher. And that is how the first inversion looks like. All you need to do is to move the bass note octave higher. So you end up having the 4th interval on the top of the chord, right? Alright, Alright, so we talked about how to turn the root position into first inversion chord. All you need to do is to move the bass note octave higher, and the rest of two notes stay the same. So A and C stay the same. Just move the bass note F octave higher. So you're gonna have interval, fourth interval on the top of the chord, as the interval between the C and F is the fourth, right? And then the interval between the bass to the middle is the third. So you assume this is the first inversion when you have the fourth interval on the top of the chord, and then the third interval on the bottom of the chord. Alright? So remember that root position wouldn't have fourth interval. It's only third in between the notes. But first inversion, you will see the fourth interval on the top of the chord, right? So the middle and the top, the interval over fourth, right? And then the bass to the middle is the interval over third. All right, now let's turn it into second inversion. All you need to do is to move the bass note octave higher. So now we're trying to turn it into a second inversion, right? All you need to do is to move the bass note A octave higher. All right, okay, and then the rest of the notes stay the same. Right, now you end up having fourth interval on the bottom of the chord, as the interval between C and F is the fourth. How about the interval between A and the C is the third, right? So the second inversion, you're going to see the fourth interval on the bottom of the chord and the third on the top. The first inversion, you're going to see the fourth interval on the top of the chord and then the third interval on the bottom of the chord, right? Okay, all right, so second inversion is the most common way to play chord number 4 because it's convenient, easier to play from chord number 1 instead of moving, jumping up and down, right? So it's pretty easy and obvious. Okay. So now we're going to talk about how to build 5/7 chord. So when you see number 7, the Arabic number 7 on the top, basically that means that it's a 4 notes chord, right? You just need to add 1 note on the top from the triad. So for example, let's build the 5th chord first. So what is the 5th of C? G. So G chord becomes chord number 5. All right. So now we're gonna turn it into 7th chord. Easy. All right. You just need, one more note on the top. It skips. All right. So as you see that, since this is the root position, the interval between the notes are the third only. Okay. All right. So this note that on the top, that is the 7th of the bass note G. All right. Most of the students, they get confused with the 7th. This note is the 7th of G, not from tonic. Remember this, okay? So that's why it's called number 7. Stands for 7th of the bass note. All right. So you just need to add the 7th on the top from the G chord. That's how you turn it into a 7th chord from chord number 5. Try it. All right. So when you just see Roman numeral number 5, basically that means it's 3 notes chord. Try it. When you see number 7 on the top, that means the 7th note of the bass note G, which is the 5th of tonic, has been added on the top, right? So you understand the difference between chord number 5 and the 5/7. All right. Now, we talked about that the 5/7, the most common way to play 5/7 is the first inversion. So that is how the root position of 5/7 look like, right? Look at this, all right? So this is 5/7, all right, which is in root position. Now we're gonna turn it into a first inversion. Easy, all you need to do is to add, move the bass note octave higher, which is G, right? So all the rest of the 3 notes stay the same. Right, and then just move the bass note octave higher. Okay, all right. So when you play just the top 2 notes, so this is exactly how the first inversion 5/7 looks like. All right, okay, yeah, okay. So actually the correct way to write the indication of chord number 5 is 6/5. That means it's the first inversion. Okay, right? Okay, so remember that. So when you see number 5/7, that stands for root position. All right. When you see the indication 6/5, that stands for the first inversion. All right. So let's talk about how we're gonna play the inversion, the first inversion of chord 5/7. So yes, of course you can play all these 4 notes, but most of kids they can't really reach, right? So the easiest way for the kids to play 5/7 is just the top 2 notes. Okay, all right. So the F and then G. All right. So this is the all right. So if you play just the top 2 notes, this is the most common way for kids to play because it's easier. They don't have to worry about stretching their fingers at all, right? And then, right, the most common way to play 5/7 in general is 3 notes chord, which you keep the third, and then the bass, and then the top, right? So the G is the 5th of C. You must keep, and then the F is the 7th of G, which you also must keep, right? Otherwise the 5/7 no longer exists, right? So the 5th of C, which is G, the bass note, and then the 7th of G, which is F, these 2 notes you must keep, all right? And then the most common way for playing the 5/7 chord is the actually 3 notes chord, which you keep the third and then omit the 5th, right? So again, you want to keep the F and then G, right? And then keeping the third, yeah, which is B, the third of G, B, right? So B, F, G is the most common way to play 5/7, 3 notes chord, right? Most of the time, the 5th note of G can be omitted. So the 3 notes chord, which you keep the third on the bass, and then F, G, right? On the top is the most common way to play, and it's easier to play from chord number 1, right? Yes, right? So this is how you play chord number 5/7, the most common and most convenient way. All right, okay.